everyone, and welcome to another episode of SAF Insights. I'm Giulia Squadrin, Associate Editor for Argus Biofuels, and joining me today to discuss SAF production pathways with a focus on gasification is Andy Cornell, CEO of ABSL. Hi, Andy. Great to have you with us today.
Hi, thanks a lot for inviting me.
No, thank you. So let's just jump into it. Could you give us a brief introduction of ABSL, a bit of an overview of the company, current operations, future production targets, and so on?
Sure. So ABSL is a company, it's around 10 years old, and we specialize in the transformation of waste into low carbon fuels while capturing carbon dioxide. And one of those important fuels is sustainable aviation fuel. So we've got kind of in-depth knowledge of the technology, of operating plants, and of the general kind of commercial environment around low carbon fuels. And we specialize on gasification because we see that as the most important pathway for sustainable fuel production. If I look back kind of over our history, so initially we had a relatively small pilot plant that we operated between 2010 2015. That proved out the technology and the science of the process. We then went on and constructed our first commercial plant, and that started in 2015. And I'm sitting in it at the moment, and that was really about proving the engineering, the operations, and developing kind of knowledge of the end-to-end process. And as far as I'm aware, we're currently the only facility in the world that's producing a catalyst-grade syngas using steam gasification. There have been others, but most of those have shut down over the last year. So I think we're the only ones still remaining and operating. We aren't developing any SAF projects ourselves, but we're working with other companies on projects around the world who want to use the ABSL gasification technology in their SAF production projects.
Okay. I think it's an interesting point, talking about other plants that are looking to use gasification, because if you look at the market today, HEFA is the main SAF production pathway that we see today. And, of course, there's other technology like co-processing. We see that around as well, and a lot of projects that are being developed using different pathways. But if we look at HEFA specifically, the amount of HEFA that can be used to meet the mandate is going to be capped in the UK, and both EU and UK have targets for the use of synthetic SAF that will start later in the decade. And while some projects for eSAF or synthetic SAF have been announced, not many have reached FID, and there's no commercial production today. And more broadly, we've seen some projects paused, cancelled, and some companies focusing on non-HEFA production struggling to take off, really. So what's your view on the development and scalability of technology pathways other than HEFA and co-processing going forward? And what are the key challenges for new market entrants?
Sure, so that's a big question. I think the starting point has to be around the scale of the challenge. There's a large amount of fossil fuel used in the aviation industry at the moment, and replacing all of that with low carbon alternatives is a big challenge. The technology that's kind of closest to readiness was always HVO, HEFA. But it's limited. It's limited in that the total feedstock that can be used is limited, and there are challenges around sustainability of that feedstock and issues around alternative land use or land use or land being moved into oil production. And I think broadly, if you look at market assessments, even with kind of quite an optimistic view, HVO is only going to be able to produce maybe 9% of the aviation demand, and so you need other technologies in order to kind of do further levels of decarbonisation of aviation. And in those alternative technologies, kind of you've got gasification based technologies, which can fill up a larger kind of percentage of the demand, and then you've got e-fuel technologies, and they're linked but slightly distinct. And as you said, in the UK, they've got a kind of an overall mandate for sustainable aviation fuel, some of which can be met by HEFA, some of which can be met through kind of gasification type pathways, and then they've got a separate target for e-fuels. So overall, there is a demand for gasification in order to supplement what HVO can do in order to kind of deliver more fuels into decarbonising aviation. And then, the key question you asked is, well, why aren't there more projects reaching close? Why isn't there more production of those gasification pathways? And I think the key challenge has to be around the technology. Gasification is a kind of combination of linking together established, mature pieces of equipment together in a novel way, but the overall combination is fairly complex, and bringing those kind of complex chains into operation is difficult. What hangs over the industry very heavily is the Fulcrum project. So Fulcrum were built a gasification-based SAF project in the US. They spent more than $1 billion on it, and then in May this year the project failed. And everybody looks at that and is trying to pick up the lessons and understanding what went wrong in that project, and what can be done differently in order to get these gasification projects working. And so our kind of ABSL's view of that is that project and other projects went kind of too far, too fast. They tried to build plants producing SAF at a large scale initially without having moved through the gradual technology development pathway you need to bring these technologies to market. And that's what ABSLs have been doing. So over the last 5 years, we've been slowly working through the development of our technology. So we've been very much the tortoise while other people have been trying to hare ahead of us and failing. But you need to build these technologies up slowly, develop competence at the right scale in order to be able to build up the confidence in technology to be able to deploy at a large scale and have a meaningful impact. But the trouble is that takes time, and when people are in a hurry, they want to try and cut corners. But ABSL's view is we've built the right platform now to be able to deploy technology at larger and larger scales.
Thanks, Andy. So basically, just to recap, I think your view is that speed to get to a commercial scale, or the pace to get to a commercial scale, has to be right for this to work, but also the technology itself is quite complex to get right. Do you see any, just a quick follow-up on that, any issues around the financing around these projects?
Oh yeah, completely. I mean, so the finance community has hopefully learned a lot of lessons from that Fulcrum experience. And I'd say the key lesson is you need a reasonably scaled demonstration plant or small commercial plant that you can look at to give you evidence of operation before you start investing in those larger plants. And that the investment community have definitely taken a fright from the Fulcrum experience against a lot of other projects, and will carry out more technical due diligence around them in order to be confident that their investment isn't going to be wasted.
Makes sense, yeah. When it comes to gasification, you've touched a little bit on the feedstocks points, and I think there's a lot of views out there about really how much sustainable feedstock is going to be available for HEFA, HVO, HEFA SAF production. And I think steps have been taken at the legislative level to expand the list of accepted feedstocks to ensure there is not too much pressure on just one particular type of waste feedstock. But do you have any views broadly on the volumes of raw materials of feedstocks that could be available for SAF production through a gasification type of process, and how does that compare with available supply? I mean, of course, supply can always be scaled up, but just a rough estimate in your view of other comparison of feedstocks for gasification as opposed to other raw materials such as waste feedstocks.
Sure. The key motivation for gasification is that it's a very omnivorous process. Anything that is hydrocarbon can go into a gasifier and can be converted to syngas, which can then be converted into SAF. And at our pilot plants, we processed what's known as refuse-derived fuels, so kind of household waste wood, tire crumb, actually cooking oils, lots of biomass residues from kind of rice or corn starch. There's just this huge range of feedstocks you can put into the gasifier, and the gasifier converts that into a syngas, which can then be converted into SAF or actually into other low carbon fuels as well. And that gives in kind of any country, that gives you the ability to kind of look at what those residues are from your biomass industry and from your waste industry, and put those into gasifiers. And the availability of those feedstocks is much larger than used cooking oil or kind of other kind of food-based feedstocks. And so So to give the UK as an example, the largest source of sustainable biomass feedstocks in the UK is household waste. It's what people throw away. Roughly, there's about 30 million tonnes of feedstock produced in that way that can be used in gasification processes, and that could generate around 4 million tonnes of SAF, which would meet about 30% of UK demand, which again comes back to that point that the used cooking oil in the UK maybe about 9% of demand. So there's much higher availability. And also there's much lower risk around land use impacts because you're taking wastes and residues rather than things that could be primary crops.
Right. When we talk about the finished product then, because I mean, as you said, HEFA is what we see available today, and then we have the targets for synthetic power to liquid. But in which markets do you expect to see greater demand for non-HEFA, non-synthetic SAF? Of course, the UK, has a cap on the amount of HEFA that can be used to meet the upcoming obligation there. So we could realistically expect some demand from this market. But what's your view on this, but also other markets beyond the UK?
So I think you've got to see SAF as a globally traded commodity. I think people will produce HEFA in the US, it'll get exported to the UK or into the EU, depending on where the greatest market price is. And so that kind of issue around regulation in particular markets. So the UK is particularly sensitive around used cooking oil and the risks around sustainability around that. But I think in that globally traded market, you're going to end up at the point where the mandates that are in place aren't going to be able to be met by used cooking oil, and that's just going to demand additional feedstock, additional technologies to be used to produce the feedstocks to meet them. So I don't think there's particularly like a market that's going to drive for particular types of aviation fuel. If I look at what's going on in the US, I look at what's going on in the EU and the UK, there's just like a demand for SAF that is going to exceed the supply. And that's going to just create a demand for like more and more forms of SAF to come into that market.
Yeah, I guess it's going to develop with obligation and targets rising. We're starting with a 2% in both EU and UK, and then based on announced capacity, I mean, there should be sufficient product to meet at least the first part of the mandates. Of course, this is only looking at mandated EU and UK SAF demand, and then, of course, it depends on how much product actually hits the market. And of course, keeping in mind voluntary demand can vary greatly. But then, of course, we're going to see the targets ramping up in the EU and the UK, and that other regions globally are also looking into SAF, either looking at incentives or obligations. So I guess your view is that it's going to depend on the market, but could be an application pretty much wherever the demand goes, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Argus do a fantastic job of tracking projects and production. I think your SAF map is a fantastic resource for seeing what's going on. But my general view is when I look at announced projects and people in production, I kind of always assume the amount they're going to produce is going to be less than they say. Generally people tend to be quite optimistic in it, and so if I look at the SAF market, I assume it's going to be short. Definitely in the UK and possibly in other markets for initially, and as the mandate wraps sort of increases to 10%, I definitely like a shortness of supply, but we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. I think the targets ramping up beyond 2030 and especially 2035, and growth of demand in other regions as well as voluntary demand will be interesting to see how the supply and demand balance will develop. But I think this is all we have time for today. Thank you very much, Andy. It was really interesting to hear your thoughts on the market and on gasifications. So yeah, thank you for joining me today for this chat.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.
Thanks. And for our listeners, if you'd like more information around the Argus SAF coverage or want to listen to more podcasts of the series, please visit the Argus Media SAF Hub. Thank you very much.